Have you ever asked yourself, is it truly possible to be happy? And if it is, how can I do it? What does true and lasting happiness involve? Welcome to Thomistic Studies. This is the second part of a three-part series on happiness and our last end. In the first part of this series, we talked about our search for meaning, and ultimately, this is a search for happiness, which involves the discovery and attaining of our last end, which Aquinas, following Aristotle, describes as an unchangeable, complete, and final good, a perfect good, for only that could really satisfy the longing in our hearts. So the question is now, what is this last end in which the acquisition of or possession of our happiness consists? Aquinas will answer this question by process of elimination, going through a list of things which many people think will ultimately make them happy. In other words, all people naturally desire their own fulfillment or happiness as the realization or acquisition of their last end. Where people differ, however, is what exactly it is in which they consider perfect happiness to consist. Things people often think will make them happy include wealth, honors, fame or glory, power, bodily goods, pleasure, some good of the soul, or any other created good. So I will just briefly discuss the reason Aquinas gives why each one of these must ultimately be ruled out as our true last end, since none of them are unchangeable, complete, or perfect goods. First, let us look at wealth. Many people think that if they could only make a lot of money, then they would be happy. But St. Thomas declares that it is impossible for a human being's happiness to consist in wealth. He explains that there are two kinds of wealth. There's natural wealth and there's artificial wealth. Natural wealth are those things that serve our natural needs and wants, such as food, drink, clothing, shelter, or that sort of thing. Whereas artificial wealth is something like money, which does not directly serve our needs, but only indirectly. I could be in a desert with a lot of money, but that would not serve my needs for food or water. So, money is used indirectly by being something we can exchange in order to purchase these things. So artificial wealth, Aquinas teaches, is only sought for the sake of natural wealth. But natural wealth cannot be our last end because it is in itself ordered toward the attaining of another end, which is to support our human nature, our life. And so we want, for example, we eat food for the sake of something else, to live or to have perhaps the pleasure even of eating. But we can never be truly fulfilled simply by having this sort of natural wealth. And we can be even less fulfilled simply by having the money to purchase it, since both natural and artificial wealth are always for the sake of obtaining something else. And so they cannot be our last end, because they are for the sake of another thing, another end. And the last end is necessarily something final and lasting and enjoyed for its own sake, rather than for the sake of attaining yet another end. To those who might say that everything can be obtained with money, Aquinas points out that although one may obtain material goods with money, spiritual goods cannot be purchased. And what about honors then? Can honors make me truly happy? Can they be a final end that is lasting and completely fulfill all my needs? St. Thomas points out that honors do not last, and to seek honors is actually the vice of ambition. whereas virtue's true reward is happiness itself. So happiness is the reward of the practice of virtue, not the practice of vice. What then about fame or glory? Fame, Aquinas says, has no stability. Hence, one's reputation can be ruined by a false report. But true happiness endures of itself and forever. As for glory, Augustine says it consists in being well known or praised, but it also cannot last if it depends on human knowledge. The only lasting glory is the glory that one has with God, and our true beatitude or happiness depends on this. In addition, human glory is frequently deceptive, since it depends on the frailty of our human knowledge. But since God cannot be deceived, his glory is always true. But could the human person's happiness consist in power? No, Aquinas says, because power has the nature of a principle. That is, you have the power to do something, whereas happiness has the nature of a last end, something you can obtain and rest in and enjoy permanently. In addition, power, like riches, honors, and fame, can be related to or used for either good or evil, whereas true happiness is the human being's proper and perfect good only. True happiness is the human person's supreme good, and it is incompatible with any evil, he says. It is also able to satisfy of itself, so that once one has attained true happiness, one no longer lacks anything, whereas wealth, honors, fame, and power, also called goods of fortune, may be lacking at any time. Or even when one has one of these, one may lack the other. I may have money, but not fame. In addition, happiness, according to St. Thomas, is something which every human being is ordained to naturally. That is, all human persons naturally desire to be happy. But what about the goods of the body, such as health or other pleasures? Can one find true, lasting, and perfect happiness in these? Can these be the last end, the final goal of all one's striving? Well, although it is true that one's health or other bodily delights are greater goods than merely external goods, that riches are, for example, the external goods, the good of the soul is a still higher good, and that should be preferred even to all bodily goods. Besides, the human person consists of both body and soul, so simply to have bodily goods, such as health, is not enough for the fulfillment of the whole person that true happiness brings. We are made for something greater even than ourselves, since we are not ourselves the supreme good. As for pleasure or delight, St. Thomas points out that delight means that our will is able to find rest in the good, which is the object of that delight. In other words, one finds delight in some good, and a true and lasting delight requires a true and lasting and perfect good. Therefore, no sensible pleasure or delight will ultimately satisfy our deepest desires. In fact, if sought to an excessive degree, they often end in sadness, as we can see in relationships based purely on using others for our own sensible pleasure. What then of some good of the soul? Surely we can find true happiness here. Here we must make a distinction. Although, as Aquinas says, happiness itself, since it is a perfection of the soul, is an inherent good of the soul. But that which constitutes happiness, that which makes one happy, is something outside of the soul. In other words, it is true that we attain happiness through the soul, by attaining to or possessing our last end. But the thing itself, which is desired as end, is that which constitutes happiness, and makes the human being happy, although the attainment of this thing is called happiness, as something belonging to the soul. Now, before continuing with this idea, let us briefly rule out the possibility of any created good constituting our true and lasting happiness. Aquinas points out that no created thing, not even an angel, could constitute true happiness, because our will could not rest there as in a last end, but reaches out to the universal font itself of good, which is the common object of happiness of all the blessed, as being the infinite and perfect good. Therefore, he declares, the universe of creatures is not the last end, but is ordained to God as to its last end. Every other good is necessarily finite and restricted, and thus has goodness by participation only. God alone, who is goodness by essence, constitutes the human being's happiness, he says. So when we ask whether wealth, honors, fame or glory, power, bodily goods, pleasure, some good of the soul, or any other created good may be my true and lasting happiness, Aquinas gives reasons why each one of these must ultimately be ruled out as our true last end. And the basic reason he gives is that these things are all finite, created goods, which do not last, or are not sufficient of themselves for perfect happiness. So we saw in the last video, happiness of the human person consists in obtaining one's last end, which is necessarily a perfect, complete, and unchangeable good. Yet all created goods fail this test, and so they cannot be the last end for which we were created. Rather, the last end of human beings is God himself, our perfect and lasting happiness, and our participation in his divine life by way of the beatific vision in heaven. In other words, because the human being is a rational creature, he or she naturally finds a kind of happiness, although imperfect and finite, in using his intellect to seek the truth, and his will to love rightly. That is, even an atheist may seek the truth found in the sciences, or love one's spouse. However, these natural human operations are elevated by grace to seeking the truth about God in faith and loving him and our neighbor in charity. Consequently, after this life, the final and perfect happiness, says St. Thomas, can consist in nothing else than the vision of the divine essence and union with God in charity. This truth, in fact, was declared dogmatically in 1336 in the Apostolic Constitution promulgated by Pope Benedict XII, called Benedictus Deus. In this constitution, the Pope declared the dogma of the beatific vision, stating that the souls of the just, once they have been purified, if necessary, have seen, see, and will see the divine essence with an intuitive vision and even face to face, without the mediation of any creature by way of objective vision. Rather, the divine essence immediately manifests itself to them, plainly, clearly, and openly, and in this vision they enjoy the divine essence. There will be no room for boredom here. You can find below this video a link to this document, Benedictus Deus. So this dogma of the beatific vision was also reaffirmed in the Vatican II document, Lumen Gentium, where it says that while some of Christ's disciples are still pilgrims on earth, and others are in the process of being purified, others are in glory, gazing clear-sighted on God himself, as he is, 3 in 1. That is, we will truly see him, the three persons in one God, the Trinity. Sometimes I have heard people murmur, however, that they think they might be bored in heaven. Will we just be standing around all day looking at the divine essence with nothing else to do? It seems to me that we need to think of what it means to be with one we love intensely. For example, if we imagine two people in love, they are happy simply to be in another's presence, even when they are not doing anything in particular. So how much more to be in God's infinitely loving presence? However, since we cannot love what we do not know, it is necessary that the soul's happiness consist mainly in contemplating the divine essence, knowing God, the Trinity, and consequently loving Him and enjoying Him as He really is. Moreover, since, as I said, God is a trinity of persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who love one another intensely, in that they are actually consubstantially united, that is, they are the one divine essence, one divine intellect, one divine will. For this reason, we believe that there are three persons in the one God. So the souls of the just will enter into this loving union of the divine persons. Of course, in being perfectly united to God, the souls of the just will also be in loving communion with one another. In addition, according to Aquinas, the vision of the divine essence fills the soul with all good things, since it unites it to the source of all goodness, God Himself. Furthermore, although the essence of the human being's happiness consists in his being united to God, the uncreated good, which is his last end, after the final resurrection, the very happiness of the soul will overflow into the body and the bodily senses, such that the entire human person will be completely and perfectly happy. In the Gospel of John, chapter 17, verse 24, Christ prays, Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, may be with me where I am, to behold my glory, which you have given me in your love for me before the foundation of the world. St. Thomas explains in his commentary on this passage that when Christ prays that they may see my glory, he is referring to the beatifying vision, in which the saints will see not only the glorification of Christ's human nature, but also the glory of his divine nature. For as stated in the book of Hebrews, he is the brightness of the Father's glory and the figure of his substance. It's Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3. St. Thomas also points to the first letter of John, chapter 3, verse 2, which says, When he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Aquinas refers as well to the book of the Apocalypse, or Revelation, chapter 21, verse 23, which says, And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine upon it, for the glory of God is its light, and its lamp is the Lamb. He explains that this refers to the fact that the glory of God will enlighten the society of the blessed who see God. By this light, the blessed are made deiform, that is, like to God, a true divinization. That is because by its own power, the created intellect cannot see the essence of God, who is infinite. So it is necessary that God aid our understanding by illuminating the intellect with divine grace, called the light of glory, lumen gloriae. By this light, we will be able to know God more perfectly, and because we love more what we know better, we will be able to love God in proportion to our knowledge of him. Aquinas explains that the blessed possess these three things in God, because they see him, and in seeing him possess him as present, having the power to see him always, and possessing him, they enjoy him as the ultimate fulfillment of desire. These three things, the vision of God, the possession of God, and enjoyment of God in heaven, correspond to the three theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, through which we are able to be united to God even while still here on earth. In the second letter of Timothy, chapter 2, verse 4, St. Paul exclaims, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." In his commentary on this passage, St. Thomas Aquinas explains that the course which we are running is the course of the perfection of the saints. That is, cursus perfectus sanctorum. And he further sheds light on it by bringing in Paul's words in the first letter of Corinthians 9:24. "So run that you may obtain," which Aquinas notes in his commentary refers to the prize of eternal life, which each one must strive for. In other words, the eternal joy of seeing God face to face and loving him and being loved by him is the final cause or last end for which we as Christians are to live and act. In the next and final part of our series, I will discuss how to attain to this ultimate meaning of our lives, how to attain to our true last end, who is God, and our eternal enjoyment and vision of